And we're officially recording, so you can go ahead and take it away, please. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So I'm not going to repeat everything. I have been doing this work probably for the last 8 or 10 years and have been with public health, I think, for 21 or 22 years. So I'm kind of getting at the end. I'm kind of excited about that, looking forward to retirement. One word that would describe how I'm feeling right now, I think, is hopeful. Hopeful for the future, hopeful that the pandemic will soon come to an end and everybody will be healthy and we'll be back to the way we were doing things. We are social creatures, and so it's very hard not to have that contact with others. So I'm happy to be here. So we're going to jump right in. I'm going to start out by just going over the learning objectives. These are just some things that I hope you guys will take from this presentation. I want you to be able to kind of identify SOS services and how the SOS program can help and support survivors. I hope you guys develop an understanding of what sexual assault is. When I started doing this work 10, 12 years ago, I had no idea what sexual assault is. We'll talk about who perpetrates and the impact that sexual assault survivors experience each and every day. And then I'm going to tell you about some skills and some support things that you can do to support survivors, and some resources that promote healing. Survivors need a lot of different things, and it depends on a lot of different things that they have gone through and experienced. So it's like one size does not fit all. And so we'll just talk about some of those things. But first, let's get an understanding of what sexual assault is. When I started doing this work, I thought sexual assault was kind of like what you see on TV, those stranger rapes, right? Someone grabs you off the street or grabs you into an apartment or an alley and rapes you. I was not aware that you could be raped by your partner, by your husband, by your significant other, by a relative, by anybody, right? So you can be raped by anybody. So sexual assault is any sexual activity involving someone who does not or cannot consent. So basically, it's about consent. You can be raped by anybody. If you are married and your spouse wants to have sex and you don't, and you say that and you say, no, I don't want to do this, and they force you to do it, that's a crime. Granted, those crimes are hard to prove, but that is rape. It's about consent. And we as individuals don't have control over a lot in our lives, but we should have control over who, when, and where someone touches our body or does something to us that we're not comfortable with. Okay, so that is sexual assault, any unwanted sexual contact, right? And then we have rape, statutory rape, date and acquaintance rape, incest, sexual harassment, and other things. But they all fall kind of under the under that umbrella. And then we know that sexual assault, it can determine whether you have done something with someone or to someone, right? If you've done something with someone, you guys have had a conversation about it, and everybody is okay with what's going to happen in these sexual activities. If you've done something to someone, you have not got their consent. You have not had that conversation. You have not had the discussion like, yes, it's okay. This is what I want to do. Let's do it. So it's all about consent, and that determines whether a crime has been committed. And that's a lot of what juries don't understand, that sexual assault's about consent. It's not about the relationship. It does not matter if you were in a relationship with this person and you consented to have sex with this person on Tuesday and they want to have sex with you on Wednesday and you say no and they force you, that is sexual assault. And that is a crime, and that is not okay. And you can file a police report on that, okay? So that's consent, and this is affirmative consent, like I was talking about. It's explicit, informed, voluntary. Two people agreeing to do something together, to participate in a sexual activity. Affirmative consent states all parties involved in the sexual activities must agree voluntarily, right? Without force, without coercion, without being talked into it. They want to do this. And both parties agree. That is affirmative consent. And that is what we stress to people. Have those conversations before you participate in those sexual activities. It's very important for both parties involved. Whoops. Okay, so now we're just going to talk a little bit about our program's philosophy. And these are our core program principles. The first thing I always like to say to victims, and I'm so proud to say this, is that all our services are free and confidential, right? That allows for a safe bond to build between victims and advocates if they know that what they disclose to you is going to stay between you and them, and it's not going anywhere else. And that goes for survivors that are all the way down, we go all the way down to age 11 and 12. They have that right. They have that right to have that relationship with someone that is confidential, that maybe they don't want their parents to know, but they need to talk to somebody. And we can be that resource for them. The only exception to this, of course, are cases where jurisdiction falls under mandatory reporting. And we have that discussion with all our survivors as far as if we have to report something, this is what we have to report, and this is who we have to report to. So there are no secrets, and survivors know how our program works, and everything is laid out for them. The other thing we have is what we call victim-centered, and that is coming from approach of everything is about the victim, right? So as advocates, we need to know the best and the most recent information, and the new research is out to help survivors adapt to the incident that they have gone through. Okay, victim-centered, always consider the victim first. Nobody knows what's better for somebody but themselves. As an advocate that is victim-centered, it is very important that we provide them with accurate information so that they can make those good decisions for themselves, okay? But you have to have education, and you have to know kind of what you're going through and what you're experiencing. And that's where the victim-centered part comes in, and we talk to them about the impact and let them know that they're not alone, that all victim survivors have these kind of feelings after being sexually assaulted. The other thing you want to do is you want to be a good listener. A lot of people think they're a good listener, but they'll be listening, and really they're thinking of what they can say to your conversation, so they're not really listening. But we need to just listen and take everything in that they're saying and acknowledge the violation that has been put upon them. Acknowledge the pain that they are going through. The thing with sexual assault is all the pain is on the inside. The majority of victims don't get a lot of injuries. And if they do, they're where they can't be seen. They're under the clothes, or they're in, areas of the body that are not shown. But the majority of the pain from a sexual assault is psychological, mental. It is some physical, right? But it takes away our sense of security and safety. And that is huge. And as an advocate, we need to try to get that back to victims, try to build that safety net back around them. And that takes time. That takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of work. But one of the main things that survivors need is someone to listen, and to listen without judgment, right? Very, very important. The other thing is that you want to come from a trauma-informed approach. And what that means is that you have to consider each individual's experience, their life experience, their support system, what they have gone through. This is going to affect how they experience trauma, and how that trauma comes out, okay? So we want to understand that there are a lot of things that come into play with trauma. I will tell you guys a little story. I had two victims at Regions Hospital, maybe probably 8 years ago, and they had both been raped and physically abused by one individual. They were friends. They lived in an apartment building across the hall from each other, and this perpetrator went back and forth, sexually assaulting both of them and physically abusing them pretty bad. So they both went to Regions Hospital, and me and my coworker, there were only two of us in the program at the time, and we went down and she took one and I took the other. And I tell this story because this is two individuals that were friends. They call themselves cousins, but they were actually good friends. They experienced the same sexual abuse and physical abuse, and they had two totally different responses to the abuse. My victim was very anxious. They were running around the room, throwing up their hands, couldn't believe it happened. My co-worker's victim was very calm, laying in bed with their hands crossed, saying, I know everything will be okay. The hospital will take care of us. We'll have aftercare. Everything will be fine. So these are two totally different responses to two individuals that went through the same thing. And what we found out was that the individual that was nice and calm, this was her third or fourth time being sexually and physically assaulted, and had been to Regions and had got treatment and had knew that she would be taken care of. My victim, on the other hand, had never been hit, touched, sexually assaulted, or anything in their life, and they were not sure how to handle it. So trauma affects individuals totally different. I am happy to say that 6 months down the line, they came into our office and they were both doing very well, and that was very good to see. But we have to remember that if individuals are not crying, or they're not hysterical, or they're not, screaming, that does not mean that something very traumatic did not happen to them. People react to it differently according to their experiences and what they have learned throughout their lifetime. So that is something that we teach law enforcement when we train them, because a lot of times law enforcement expects victims to be wild and just, oh my God, I was raped, and hysterical. And some people will just come up and say, hey, this person raped me and I need to file a police report. They can be very calm. That doesn't mean that they have not been raped or sexually assaulted or hurt. It just means everyone deals with things in different ways. And I think it's very important as a society that we understand that you don't have to be falling down crying for something horrible to happen and for you to be impacted by that incident. So that is how we look at trauma. Empowering and empower-based. As a lot of programs do, we emphasize self-sufficiency, and we build on individual strengths, right? We know that folks have a lot going on, and they have a lot of things that may be negative in their life, but we consider those challenges to work on and to build on. And so we try to give that power back to sexual assault victims. Because sexual assault is about taking someone's control and power away, right? A lot of times perpetrators don't like sex, or it's not about sex, or it's just about they get off or get high on the fact that I can dominate this person and they can't do anything. And that is what feeds them and motivates them to keep doing it, is that feeling of control over somebody. And so when that is taken from victims, it's important that we work with them so that they can regain that power and know that they can move on. And then the anti-oppression framework. So this is a cornerstone of work with sexual violence survivors, right? It helps people to understand that sexual violence, it's not an individual problem. Sexual violence permeates our society and shows up in so many forms, right? Experiences of inequality affect how survivors experience victimization and the aftermath of sexual violence, right? Sexual violence is the lowest reported crime. I think it's maybe 20%. Or something like that. And people don't report it because one of the main reasons is they feel that they won't be believed. Sexual assaults and rapes get reported faster and more often when they're committed by a stranger. Stranger assaults are very, very rare. The majority of individuals get sexually assaulted by somebody they know. It's somebody in their inner circle. It's their spouse, it's an ex, it's a family member, it's your brother's friend, it's the guy that works at the store, it's somebody in your inner circle that we usually get sexually assaulted by. And that is very, very hard for individuals, because how do you trust? How do you build that trust again when somebody you trusted hurt you? And that is the struggle that sexual assault that sexual assault victims struggle with. So oppression is a systematic disadvantage of certain social groups in order to benefit other social groups, as we know. And it's often accompanied by individual prejudices, which people may express covertly or explicitly. And that is very hurtful. And everyone has multiple identities, right? Some of which are oppressed and some are not. Race, gender, economic class, sexual orientation, all those kind of things. The LGBTQ community gets raped at a much higher rate than other communities. I think they have some of the highest rates of rape and sexual assault, and that's only because of the way they identify. Trans Black women have some of the highest rates of rape and also homicide. And so those are really areas that we need to work on. Individuals should not be sexually assaulted because of how they choose to live their life or how they choose to identify. I think that's something as a society that we need to really start to change. And I think gradually things are getting better. That is the hope that I always have. And then as far as safety, we don't do a lot of safety planning that maybe like intimate partner violence does. But we do some safety planning just because sexual assault victims lose that feeling of safety. So physical safety, the first things that we try to address, like, are you in a safe place now? Is the person that hurt you around? Do they know where you live? We've changed locks on individual doors that maybe where the perpetrator maybe had the key. And so we were able to do that. So just working on some immediate safety needs is what they do. And sometimes we do long-term safety planning with folks as well. But that's kind of our core program principles at SOS. And then these are our services. So that the top two are the main things that SOS does. So we have a 24-hour crisis line that is answered by maybe 5 or 6 advocates that work during the day. And then after hours and on the weekends and holidays, we have maybe 40 or 50 volunteers that answer our crisis line. Also, we have a 24-hour medical outreach that we do at Regents Hospital, St. John's, and United. And before the pandemic, we would respond to these hospitals. There's a protocol in Ramsey County that says sexual assault victims will not be kept waiting in the lobby. And so any sexual assault victim that goes to any hospital emergency room in Ramsey County and discloses that they were sexually assaulted within the last 10 days can get a free forensic exam. And they should be roomed within 5 minutes of coming into the ER. And that is the protocol. We don't want sexual assault victims waiting in the lobby. So after they are roomed, a sexual assault nurse examiner, we call them SANE nurses. They're specially trained nurses that work with sexual assault victims to provide medical care and also to collect any evidence. So a SANE nurse is called and SOS is called for an advocate to respond. We both have 30 minutes to respond. We have that time limit because these exams take anywhere from 3 hours plus. And so it's not fair to have a victim waiting for us to come for an hour or two and then have to go through this long exam. So we all get there in 30 minutes and go through the exam. Since COVID, we have not been going to the hospital, of course. We have not been allowed in the hospitals. We are still not allowed in the hospitals. We are hoping that will change within the next month or sooner. We have been doing our visits with the survivors virtually. So the same nurses have an iPad in the room with the survivor, and then they call an advocate, and then our face pops up on the screen, and we are actually get to see the nurse and the survivor, and SOS explains their services. We usually stay on why the survivor gives their narrative of what happened. That way the advocate knows what services the survivor will need after the exam. And then we will follow up with the survivor within the next 24 to 48 hours. So that's how we're doing it right now. We're doing it virtually mostly, and we're also doing it over the phone at St. John's and United Hospital. We're only doing it virtually right now with regions. We hope to be back in person in all of them within a month or two, as soon as everything is better. So that's our medical outreach. Our volunteers cover our hospitals in person when we were doing it, and virtually as we do, but they cover after hours for us on the weekends and also on holidays. And so we have that 24-hour medical coverage between staff and volunteers. And then we do short-term counseling. We're not therapists or counselors, but we're sexual violence counselors. And so we will meet with victims 2 or 3 times, and that is just to kind of explain the impact and the dynamics of sexual violence. A lot of times as we get further into this presentation, you'll see that survivors really don't understand what happened, and it takes them a while to process that. And so a lot of times they think they're alone, and they think they're going crazy, and that they're losing their mind, and that they're the only one this has happened to. And that in that short-term counseling, that is when we can kind of normalize their feelings, tell them, you know what, you're not alone, everybody feels like this, and it does get better. We also have a support group for primary and secondary victims that is on hold right now due to COVID. We are still doing all our trainings and education, some safety plannings, tons of referrals. Oops, I'm sorry, I am so bad at this. And then our follow-up program, and I just want to talk about our follow-up program for a couple minutes here. When I first started, there were 2 advocates, myself and Kathy, and so we would go to the hospital. We would follow up with the survivor 24 to 48 hours later, and maybe call up once more, and that's it. And we would move on to the next person. And after a while, we kind of felt like we were just putting a Band-Aid on things and didn't really know if these survivors were getting services after they left the hospital. We had made that good connection and built that relationship, but we weren't able to maintain it because we didn't have the staff. So now 8 or 9 years later, where we have 6 or 7 advocates and we all have our own caseload, we have our follow-up program. So we will see them in the hospital, in person or virtually. We will follow up 24 to 48 hours after that. Then we will follow up 2 weeks later, 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, and as long as they need us. We do this because we know from research, if sexual assault victims don't get some kind of services or something around the 6-month period after the assault, if they're predisposed to alcohol or drugs or mental illness, that's when things can kind of set in. And so we are aware of that. We're also aware that survivors will have our number right in front of them, but they still won't call us. You know, it's just like, oh, I'm okay. I'm fine. But if we reach out to call them and say, hey, I've been thinking about you, how's it going? Usually they say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you called. I'm having trouble sleeping. That's when we can refer them to services and then keep that contact going. So we are lucky at Public Health that we don't have a time limit on how long we work with survivors. We work with them until they say, you know what, Khalees, I'm doing good. I don't need you to call me anymore. I'm great. I got your number. That is what we work to hear, and that is what we love to hear. So I'd say the usual time, if they have filed a police report and they have a criminal case, the criminal cases can go up to a year and a half, sometimes 2 years. And we will work with them through that entire process. And sometimes longer, because as we know, sometimes the criminal justice system doesn't provide the justice that we are hoping for. And then we have to figure out what's going to work best with them so they can continue that healing process. So those are our services. So who do we serve? So we work with adolescents, young adults, secondary victims, parents. We work with anybody that calls our crisis line. We get a lot of calls from parents sometimes, parents of teenagers, parents of young adults. They will call and say, hey, my kid's been sexually assaulted. They're not ready to do anything. What can I do to help them? And not re-victimize. And that's when we just kind of talk through some stuff and what sexual assault survivors need to heal. So that's kind of who we serve. And this is kind of how the numbers are broken down. So the majority of folks that we serve are 18 to 34. We get a lot of calls from that 18 to probably 24 also. That college age group, especially when school's in, we were getting quite a few calls from colleges and things, which is not surprising. And then 35 to 64 is 28%. And then this last bunch over here, this is usually folks that may be in, that may be in like nursing homes or something like that. We did do a training video for all nursing homes in Minnesota. And those cases are really, they are very difficult because usually it's a person that they think can't identify who hurt them. So I've had a blind person, I've had somebody that was deaf, and then I had somebody that had Alzheimer's. But the thing is about those kind of facilities, they have cameras and they always know who's working. So those perpetrators always get caught, and hopefully that will start to deter some of that from happening in those kind of settings, because people are so vulnerable, and it's really sad. So this is a referral source. We get referrals from anywhere, but primarily from Ramsey County hospitals, law enforcement, schools, other community programs, and we also get them from Midwest Children's Resource Center. They are located in Children's Hospital, and I call them the experts in child sexual abuse. Kids that go there, they're specialized nurses and doctors there. They get videotaped. Usually law enforcement and child protection is always there. As you guys can imagine, when kids get abused, it's a big deal, and it's very, very difficult for parents when their kids get abused, because our primary job that we think is to take care of our kids and keep our kids safe, which is very true. And so we SOS advocates will meet with parents and just try to help them navigate this and give them ideas on how to work with kids. Midwest Children's Resource Center does an excellent job of setting kids up in counseling and support groups and giving them what they need. SOS job is to take care of their parents, and that's way harder than taking care of the kids. Kids are resilient. If kids get what they need and things get back to normal and they get that support, 9 times out of 10, they are fine. But it's the parents who carry a lot of guilt. And if you think about it, we leave our kids with people we trust, and that's usually family members or very good friends. And those are the folks that are hurting our kids. And so it's very, very difficult for parents to move on from that. So we provide a lot of services for parents. So just a little bit about our volunteer program. SOS is a volunteer program. We could not do what we do without our volunteers. We have a training every year, usually in the fall. Sometimes we also do one in the spring, but we do that to recruit volunteers to answer our 24-hour line and respond to our hospitals. Volunteers have donated, probably that number is probably up to 15,000 hours yearly for us now. And I told the county that they are saving a lot of money because these volunteers go above and beyond, and they get up in the middle of the night at 2 and 3 a.m. and go to the hospital in the winter time and when it's 30 below and just all kinds of things, only because they want to support the victim and to help and to give back. So we are fortunate. We have awesome volunteers. We always have, and we just always manage to get a great bunch of folks. We have a partnership with Hamlin and some of the other university and colleges in Ramsey County that we work closely with also to get volunteers. And we have a lot of students that volunteer with SOS. So I always like to give them a shout out because like I said, we could not do what we do without you. So thank you. And I really appreciate that when we have no volunteers, my phone rings at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. So thank you for being part of SOS. So just a little bit about our medical outreach. I talked a little bit about it. So if you have been sexually assaulted within the last 10 days, you can go to any hospital in Ramsey County and get a forensic exam. And forensic exams are really expensive. They're over like $2,000, but they're covered by the county where the sexual assault occurred. So if you were raped in Hennepin County, but you want to go to Regions Hospital, you are welcome to go to Regions Hospital. Regions will do the exam and send the bill to Hennepin. So you are welcome to go to any hospital you want. You won't be charged, and we do encourage folks to please go in if you have been raped and get that exam. It's more than just being checked for evidence. It's about your health and what may have happened to you during that rape. So I talked a little about this earlier, how the sexual assault nurse and the advocate both have 30 minutes to respond to the hospital when we are paged for a sexual assault victim. And of course, 30 minutes doesn't always work out. And we know that. We try for 30 minutes, but in the winter, in bad weather, in the middle of the night when it takes you a while to wake up, like myself, you may not hit that 30 minutes, but as close as possible, just so we don't have the victim waiting longer than necessary. So the same nurse and the advocate, we work as a team to provide the sexual assault survivor with care. And like I said, these exams take 3+ hours. I haven't been in an exam that has taken 3 hours in years. Mine are always 8+ hours. But that's okay because I'm there to support the victim. So sexual assault survivors are examined from head to toe after they provide a narrative of their experience. So the same nurse needs to know what happened in that rape so that she knows where to look for injuries and evidence and where to provide that care. My role as an advocate in that room with the survivor and the nurse is to support the victim, right? To answer any questions. I'm the kind of person that is usually trying to get their mind off of what happened, right? So I'm talking to them. If it's a college student, I'm asking about school, kind of what's going on, if they have any plans. Sometimes I have a sense of humor, so I may say a joke and I may have them laughing. But there's no need for me to talk about the rape because we know why we're there. Right. So my job is to support them and just try to keep them calm, answer any questions that they may have, and assure them that they didn't do anything wrong. Sexual assault victims always blame themselves, right? And it's important that they understand that it's not their fault, and that has to come from us. Okay, so just a little bit on our legal advocacy. In a perfect world, we would love for every sexual assault survivor to make a police report. But it is not my job to say, hey, you were sexually assaulted, you should go to the police. My job is to say, hey, here are your options. If you do go to the police, I will go with you. You will never have to talk to law enforcement without an advocate present, okay? I can explain to them how this process will work, right? As far as talking to law enforcement, the kind of questions that will be asked. What will happen after the interview? How will the police let me know what's going on? I can provide all that information and be that person between the survivor and law enforcement. Law enforcement gets busy. They have a lot of victims and a lot of stuff they're working on, but I can call them and get updates and call the survivor and say, hey, I just talked to your investigator and they're working on this, they're working on that, right? Sexual assault cases take a very long time. They're not going to be over in 3 or 4 months. The fastest one I think I've seen is 8 or 9 months. They're waiting for evidence to come back from the BCA, which is the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, right? If there is any evidence. Sometimes it takes long to interview everybody that's involved. Sometimes they have to find the perpetrator. They don't know where, so they have to interview them also. So these cases do not move quickly. And since they don't, it's hard for survivors sometimes to stay engaged. Are the police doing anything? I haven't heard from them in 3 months. They're probably not working on my case. That's where advocates step in and say, nope, they're working on it. I got an update for you, And that's how we try to keep victims engaged. And that's also information we provide in our follow-up calls with victims. We not only are checking up on them, but we are updating them on their criminal case. SOS has very good relationships with all the 8 or 9 law enforcement agencies in Ramsey County and the Ramsey County Sheriff. And so we are quick to call them for updates and they respond to us very quickly. And it helps them out and takes some of the weight off of them that we can know, here, I'll call the victim, I'll explain this to them. I know you have other stuff to do. I have this good relationship with them, not a problem. And that's where we work as a team with law enforcement as well. Okay, and then the civil advocacy support. So we are able to help survivors obtain orders for protection and harassment restraining orders. I just did one this morning over the phone with my survivor OFP. Took maybe an hour, and then we're able to fax it into the domestic abuse office. We also are in partnership with Standpoint Law Firm, and they provide free legal services and advice to survivors of sexual assault. So a lot of times we'll have cases that are more involved, right? It's more than just an order of protection. It's other stuff. They may be in school and they may need special accommodations in school, or they may need special accommodations where they live. If there's other things besides just an order of protection or harassment restraining order, we will make a referral to Standpoint. And one of their attorneys and legal advocates will work with them. A lot of times, as I learned this from Standpoint, a lot of times it's not always good to get an OFP or HRO. Sometimes it causes more problems for the survivor, depending on if they have like child custody stuff going on, or they're in the middle of a separation or something like that. It can cause more problems. So if it's more of a complicated case, SOS will refer to Standpoint. But if it's just, hey, I just need this OFP and HRO, then the advocates can provide that service for survivors, which is really nice. And it's really nice that we are able to fax it in because we're all working from home now, as I am as well. So that is our civil. And then this, again, is our follow-up program that I talked about, how it can take up to 2 years to complete cases. And during this time, it's important that SOS staff stay connected with the survivor and keep them informed on the progress of the case. A lot of times when individuals would file law enforcement reports and there wasn't an advocate involved, and law enforcement may only call you when there's a need, right? So they're not going to call you every 2 or 3 weeks to tell you what's going on, but they may call you if they have a question for you. Then it may be 4 months before they call you again because they need something else for you or because they want to update you. It's a long time frame. Sometimes 2 weeks is a long time frame for survivors to hear what's going on with their criminal case. And so that's where advocates can step in and say, you know what, let me just see if anything has changed. And sometimes they'll call law enforcement, they're like, nope, there's no changes. I still haven't completed those interviews. But just for survivors to hear that, just for them to know that, no, law enforcement is still working on your case. They have to work on your case. They can't just close it unless they let you know, or unless, you are notified. They just won't close your case because they want to. But having that connection with them and keeping them updated on that criminal case, and explaining, not only keeping them updated, but explaining how it works, because we've been doing this for a while and working with law enforcement in the courts, we can kind of understand how this works and kind of explain it to them, because if you're new to the criminal justice system, there's a lot to it, as we know, right? And it's hard even for someone that has a background to navigate it, and someone just walking in completely blind is very hard. So we're able to explain the process, and also provide that support for our survivors. And I think our follow-up program is one of the best things that we do, because sometimes people don't reach out to you. They need help. But if somebody calls them and someone is right there on the phone and you're like, well, this is so simple. Yes, I do need help. I don't have to dial. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to say, that I am in need. A lot of times it's hard for folks. And so it's nice that we can call them and offer our services. So I just want to see, are there any questions before we go further that I could answer?
Khalees, it looks like there are some in the Q&A, and you may have kind of addressed some of them as well. So if you kind of mentioned it already, you can say next question. But one question I see is that Minnesota will give a forensic exam after 10 days. West Virginia allows 96 hours. This person doesn't understand the 10 days. So maybe if you could expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, so in 2016, Ramsey County used to only do them up to 5 days, because that's what research said, that we can collect DNA off a rape victim up to 5 days. And then the Ramsey County Sexual Assault Protocol Team, which has been around for about 20 years, is made up out of all the law enforcement agencies, Ramsey County, John Choi's office, Ramsey County Prosecutor's office, advocates, forensic nurses, and other programs. They found research that you could collect DNA off of sexual assault victims up to 10 days. This was not a peer-reviewed research study, I believe, but Ramsey County decided anyways to go up to 10 days because sometimes a rape victim will come in 2 days after the rape and they have not showered, have not did anything, and we don't get any DNA. Sometimes they'll come in 8 days after and we'll get DNA. So there's no way to say that the sooner you come in that we're going to collect DNA. I mean, the sooner you come in is a better chance of it. So we went up to 10 days, not only for the DNA, but because we wanted to connect with more victims. Okay. So in that forensic exam, it's not only about a medical exam, but it's about connecting to a SOS advocate and building that relationship. In that exam, those nurses offer antibiotics for sexually transmitted infections. They will offer the morning after pill if that person did not use a condom, if there's a chance or risk of pregnancy, and they will also see if they're at risk for HIV. So it's not only collecting evidence, but it's also taking care of their body and connecting them with advocacy so that we can build that relationship. So in essence, Ramsey County went to 10 days because we want to provide more services to sexual assault victims. It wasn't necessarily about collecting DNA up to 10 days. Because sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. Like I said, it just depends. And I will even have victims, if it's 11 or 12 days after, I will still tell them to go into the hospital. And I'll let the forensic nurse make the call if they're going to do that exam. Because when it's so close, A lot of nurses have said, send them in anyways. So that is why Ramsey County is 10 days. It's not so much about, we had research we could collect DNA up to that point, because we didn't, but we wanted to reach more victims. And when they come in the hospital and an advocate is there and you're in that room with the advocate and the nurse for 3+ hours, you get to know that victim and what they're going to need when they leave that room, and you build that relationship and that rapport, and it makes it easier to provide those services. We know there's a lot of sexual assault victims walking around that have not had any kind of services, and it impacts every aspect of their life. So that was the goal of Ramsey County, to reach more individuals, not so much about the research that said we could collect DNA. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Khalees.
Sure.
So there's another question about, how do you work with confidentiality while using volunteers? Do the volunteers go through a background check?
Yes. Volunteers go through everything we do very rigorously. Background checks. They have to do some other stuff for the county before they can come on board for us. And then SOS has to provide them with 8 hours of continuing training in all areas. So yes, they have the same credentials that staff does.
Thank you, Khalees. There's
Yep.
another question about how SOS workers work with victim coordinators at prosecutors' offices. So this person shares that some of their work as an advocate is also provided by those coordinators in some counties, particularly regarding the criminal cases.
Yeah, so we, so a lot of our cases go through the Ramsey County Prosecutor's Office, and then they're assigned a victim witness advocate. So the victim witness advocate just takes care of them through the criminal justice process. So after the trial and all that's over, they're done. Their role is done. Where we continue on. I have been in court with folks that have had a victim witness advocate. It doesn't matter. We are still there to support them. And our services are totally different. I don't know a lot about court and all that. That's why they have the victim witness advocate to prep them and get them ready for court. But we are still involved. A lot of times the advocate will go down to the Ramsey County Prosecutor's Office with the survivor and meet with the prosecutor and support them through that process. Sometimes law enforcement is there and we're all meeting together. So it just depends on the situation, but advocates are involved through all of that. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Khalees. So kind of similarly to that, there's a question about, does SOS do any type of co-responding with the local police or hospitals? I know you mentioned that a little bit. I don't know if you want to expand.
Co-responding, no. We do interviews together, and sometimes at the law enforcement agencies, but we've also gone to other places. We've gone to nursing homes, schools, and met law enforcement there. But no, usually it's the patrol officers that are responding first, and then we find out about, that there was a sexual assault and that kind of thing. So no.
Great, thanks, Khalees. Sorry, I was just typing some of her responses back in the Q&A.
No, that's okay.
There's some other questions coming in related to that question as well. What happens if the law enforcement officer, so I can't speak today, is the one that is being accused of perpetrating the sexual assault?
As far as what happens, the same thing happens. I actually had a case where it was a state patrol officer, a Minnesota state patrol officer that that was accused of raping my client, and they had another jurisdiction did it, and actually Maplewood police took that report and did the investigation. So it works just like any other sexual assault case. Like if it was a St. Paul officer, St. Paul PD is not going to investigate. right? Because that's a conflict of interest. So Ramsey County Sheriff or somebody else would come and investigate. But it works the same way. And we have had law enforcement officers that have been accused of sexual assault. So yep, it's the same thing. Works the same way.
Thank you, Khalees.
Sure.
There's another question. You mentioned that it may not be the best to suggest a criminal report if they are going through a child custody or separation. How would you determine if it would be okay to suggest a criminal report? Would an order of protection help with custody?
Yeah, and I wasn't really referring to a criminal report. I was referring to like harassment restraining order or OFP, and that's when I would refer them to Standpoint Law Firm, just to run their situation by them, because I don't know all the law and I don't know all this stuff about child custody and all that, but we would hate to make a situation worse. And like I said, if it's more than just a HRO, if there's more stuff involved, I want them to talk to the attorneys. And sometimes they'll come back and say, you know what, I talked to them and they said, I just need a HRO. I'm like, perfect, let's do it. But I would definitely refer them to Standpoint, just to make sure that we're not causing more harm. And I didn't mean to file a police report, because they can always file a police report. And sometimes that can be an issue too. But I was referring more to getting the orders of protection and the harassment restraining orders, because they have to be served and then they have to go to court if they fight it and that kind of thing. So that's kind of what I meant.
Thank you, Khalees.
Sure.
Do you mind expanding a little bit more on best practices for if a survivor wants to make a report of their sexual assault? Would you wait the 24 or 48 hours to help set that interview up?
Well, no, I feel a lot of different ways about that. First of all, it's always up to the survivor. When they are getting that forensic exam, the forensic nurse is going to ask, do you want me to call the police? Do you want the police to come here and take the report? They are only supposed to ask that once. Sometimes they ask more than once, and I don't like that. I think when someone comes in to get that medical exam, it is a lot to go through. You've just been raped or sexually assaulted, and now you have this nurse asking you questions, and they're checking you from head to toe. If there's any kind of penetration, you have to have a pelvic exam. I mean, there is a lot going on. And so if they say no, then that's fine. And I always tell the nurses that we will always bring that up to them when we talk to them. So I don't know if I would necessarily do it on the first phone call, but I probably would do it on the second phone call. Sometimes survivors know, yep, I want to file a police report. Sometimes they're like, you know what, I don't know. And I said, well, let's talk about it. And let me tell you how that whole process works, and how that's going to look. And then after they get the information, then they can decide. So a lot of times they will make it in the hospital. They'll have the forensic nurse call. Yep, let's call the police. I'm ready to do it. And other times they're like, you know what, I don't know. I'm not ready to do that. And if I hear them hesitating, then I don't want them asked again, because SOS advocates take care of that. I said, ideally, we love for everybody to make a police report, right? More police reports, more people charged, more, bad people locked up, all that stuff. But that's not our job. Our job is to support them if they want to, or if they don't, and walk them through that process and explain that process and answer those questions about the criminal justice system. So it's all up to the survivor, and everybody's different. Sometimes they wait 6 months, sometimes 6 years. We've had people wait 25 years. Some people do it a week later. I talked to my mom and dad, I'm ready to do it, so it's up to them. Our job as advocates is to explain that process and be there for support.
Excellent. Thank you, Khalees.
Sure.
There's a question about nurses being mandated reporters. Don't they have to call LE?
Do they have to call law enforcement? Um, They are mandated reporters, but it's something about sexual assault, you guys, and I'm sorry, I'll have to check on that question. I do not know the answer to that. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's down to a certain age or what. I'm not sure.
I would just interject that sometimes, and again, I would need to have this fact checked as well
Yeah.
too, but that there's a reporting in terms of reporting to the hospital or reporting to a supervisor or letting someone else know because they are mandated reporters, but not necessarily that they have to call law enforcement. So similarly to like a teacher who has found out about child abuse, they aren't calling the police, they're reporting it through their different channels. So that might
Mhm.
similar to this situation, but I would need to get that confirmed. And the laws might differ depending on even the county or the state too.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, I see a few other questions about Ramsey County SOS as a program. So do volunteers have to be local or can volunteering be done remotely? Oh, Khalees, I think you are frozen. I think we lost Khalees. My apologies, everyone. I do not know the answer to that question, but hopefully Khalees will be able to join in just a moment here and I can answer a different question. In the meantime, there's a question about what are your thoughts related to the use of the term victim versus survivor? And I definitely can't speak for Khalees. I can speak for myself in that I did notice Khalees sometimes can switch the terminology. Sometimes it seems that she would use victim if it was kind of related to things related to like legal issues or kind of that circumstance, and then sometimes using survivor in a more advocacy based kind of situation and context. And then I also heard her use client as well too in regarding her relationship to the person that had experienced sexual assault that she is supporting. And so I would say that I would imagine a similar response would be that it's up to that person, right, of how they identify. Some people identify as victim survivors, so hyphenated, because they acknowledge that they were victimized by something. It wasn't their fault, it was something that was done to them, but it was something that they had also survived. So some people kind of like that terminology. Others seem to gravitate towards survivor because it feels potentially more empowering to them, and taking kind of power back from a really terrible and traumatic situation, and kind of honoring their strength and resilience with that. But some people also say, you know what, this is something that I didn't want to happen to me. It was horrible. And I think that the word victim better encapsulates and captures the experience of what has happened. So I know that there's a lot of different terminologies and ways to identify and language to use. And I would always ask that person instead of, labeling them yourself of, what do you identify as a victim, as a sexual assault victim or a survivor, or I've even heard of a thriver, so kind of like survivor and thriving at the same time. So there's a lot of different language that can be used, and at Women's Advocates we use victim survivor with a hyphen. So our mission is to walk with victim survivors and our community to break the cycle of domestic violence. And so I know that that's something that our organization uses, and so yours might be different as well too. So hopefully that answered that question, and feel free if anyone else has any other thoughts or opinions about language that, works for different communities, because sometimes that can be a deterrent, right? So sometimes focusing more person-centered might be even not using those words and focusing more on what they'd experienced or kind of who they are as a person beyond that experience and identity. So it is definitely more complex and kind of up to that person, but um, those are some of my thoughts about that. I'm trying to see if there are any other questions, and I'll see if Khalees is able to join us again. So there's another question in the chat about wondering if someone has been assaulted and did not want to turn the person in, and did not seek help at that time. Is there different support or program to guide them to if, oh, perfect. I'll pause and allow Khalees to answer this. Oh, you're muted, Khalees.
Hey, I apologize. My whole computer restarted.
Oh no. Well, I'm glad you're back. I just answered one question about language and do you use victim or do you use the word survivor? So I gave my own personal opinion. I didn't speak for you. I kind of gave some context about that. So you can feel free to add to that if you would like as well.
Yeah, I think we go back and forth. A lot of my coworkers use victim survivor. I kind of like survivor, and I try not to go back and forth, but I tend to. I don't think we ever standard one at SOS, but I think with the majority say victim survivor. I just kind of like survivor because you're not a victim. But that's just my preference. So, but yeah, I don't do SOS doesn't really have a standard one that we use.
Yeah, thank you. I think the question that you were answering before your computer restarted was about volunteering and if that is something that you have to be local for, or if that's something that you can do remotely.
You probably could do it remotely for a couple more months, but we are going to be back in person at the hospitals. And so we would need folks to be able to get to the 3 hospitals within, 30, 40 minutes. And then also you would need the 40-hour sexual violence training that's required by the state of Minnesota before working with survivors of sexual violence. So, but yeah, we're only going to be, working remotely until the hospitals let us back in, and we're hoping it's a month or two. So we would probably want you to be able to do in person as well.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Similarly, there's a question about, did you receive grants to grow your program? They're thinking about their own county and its immigrant population and their needs and support regarding sexual assault and domestic violence survivors, and just any context about that.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part.
Receiving grants to grow the program.
Okay. Yes, I believe we got, 2 or maybe 3 of our employees were hired because of grants. In 2018, John Choi, the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, gave SOS money to hire 2 advocates and gave St. Paul PD money to hire 2 sex crimes investigators. And so we were able to get our staff up to 6 because we were down to 4. So I think probably 2 or 3 of our folks are on grants and the rest is tax levy money, I believe. And some other funding. I'm not sure of all our funding. That would be a question probably for our supervisor, but I know there are at least 2 or 3 employees that have that we were able to hire because of grants. And then I'm sorry, is there more to the question?
Nope, I think that was it.
Okay.
There's I think one last question that I saw. And this person says, I may have missed this question, but I'm wondering if someone has been assaulted and did not want to turn the person in and did not want to seek help at that time. Is there a different support or a different program to guide them if it is way past the 10 days?
Yeah. And even if it is past the 10 days, then you probably can't get a forensic exam, but you should still go to a health clinic or your primary provider and get checked out. Especially if there's any type of penetration and the person didn't use a condom or other objects were used where you could have been injured. It's always good to get checked out. In my list of referrals, there is Family Tree Clinic, who is really good with folks that have been sexually assaulted. And then there's also Clinic 555 down at my building, 555 Cedar, which has been very good at working with folks who have been sexually assaulted and checking them after the sexual assault and also after the forensic exam when they need to get checked 2 weeks later. So it's still a good idea to go in. If there is no penetration and you don't think you have any injuries or you don't think you need any health care, I would still, if they want to, it's always up to the survivor, right? We can't force them to do anything. I mean, we'd like them to do this and do that and get these services, but it has to be on their own time. And I would at least have them call SOS. Just give them our number and we can give them a ton of information and referrals and really just let them know that every decision they make it's up to them. And sometimes it takes people a while to process what happened to them and to make a decision as to which way to go. I don't know if I want to file a police report, or maybe 2 weeks later they do want to file a police report. Maybe after talking to an advocate, they're like, you know what, I can do this. I got my advocate there and I want this person to know that what they did to me is wrong. So as long as I have that support, I can get through. So I just think that survivors need to hear that they're not alone, but they also do not need to be drilled about what happened. They don't want to be asked details about what happened. You just need to let them know that you're a person that will listen to them when they're ready to talk without judgment. And when they are ready, they will come to you. And that is the best way to help sexual assault victims. Let them know that you're there. You're a person that's not going to judge them. And whenever they're ready to talk, you're ready to listen. But I would not ask them about it every day, every other day. Ask them how they're doing and all that, because it takes them right back to that day when the incident happened. And they may not want to go there at that time. Eventually they have to go there in order to start healing, but it's on their time frame. And it's when they feel that they're ready to do it. So the best thing we can do is be supportive and not judgmental and just listen. Sometimes people just want to talk. We have people call our crisis line that I will say 2 words and they will do all the talking. I'll be like, and at the end they'll say, oh my God, thank you. I feel so much better. So sometimes they just need somebody to talk that they know that understands what they're going through and that they're not judgmental, that somebody gets it, right? Somebody understands me. But survivors have to get those services in their own time. And there's just no way to change that. And everybody has their own timetable. It depends on the support system you have in your life. But certain people I see in the hospital, I'm like, oh, they're going to be great. They've got good friends. Her friends understand. They've got good family. Or some people I go, oh my God, they have nobody. They have no one to talk to. Who's going to help them through this? So if you have good people around you that are supportive, folks do a lot better. And it's just, it's hard for sexual assault victims because like I said earlier, all the pain's on the inside. And it's hard to, intimate partner violence, you see the black eye, somebody's been hurt, but when they've been raped, it's all inside. And it's that feeling of no control. Somebody has taken something from me and I will never be the same and I will never feel the same and I will never have that feeling of safety and security. That's why, a lot of times I'll talk to college students and they'll say, yeah, my friend said, how come you're still laying around? Why are you still moping around? How come you don't feel better? I said, because they don't understand. And they always tell me how good I look, and if they could see my insides is what this one person said to me. They wouldn't think I look good if they could see my insides. So it's hard for folks on the outside to understand the trauma that sexual assault causes, and the impact that it has on individuals' lives. And it's very real. And like I said, I have people 30, 40 years ago have been raped, still struggle. They've been in therapy, they've been in counseling, everything, but it's still there. And they still need that person to talk to that understands it. So I hope that helps.
Absolutely. Yeah, that validation and affirmation is really important. There's some more questions flowing into, we'll see how many we can answer before the time is up.
Okay.
But there's one about, are there any sexual assault or SOS specific, so to Ramsey County services that are available in Spanish or other languages?
So a lot of the program, excuse me, a lot of the programs have Spanish speaking employees. And we used to have 3 and now we have 1 Spanish speaking individual, I think. And a lot of the county, I can say this because I'm a county employee too, but we're a little behind on stuff. And as far as getting our written materials transferred to other languages, but that is something that we are working on, but definitely Spanish. But most of our programs within public health have a Spanish speaking person. So we can work with Spanish speaking individuals. But we are working on getting our brochures and all that kind of stuff translated. Right now, we only have it in English, which is very embarrassing to say because we are public health, but it's true. But we are working on getting them translated to other languages for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. And then there's a question about the experience of sexual assault for people who identify as, so I think it says Black women. So Black women who are assaulted by husbands or boyfriends, do they tell any information about that specific experience? And
Yeah, and I think actually I think in the African American community it's getting a lot better. I know back years ago when that happened, African American women would not report because they did not want the police coming into their community and taking their Black men away and locking them up. And so they kept quiet about a lot of stuff and they did not report. Things are changing. We have a lot of African American women that, not a lot, but a fair number that have come forward and that have been sexually assaulted by a partner or a spouse or something like that. So the numbers are changing. One race that we never see is, or never, I shouldn't say never, but our numbers are very, very low, is, oh, my mind went blank, I'm sorry. Oh, is Native Americans. And I know they have some of the lowest reporting numbers, but that is, we rarely see them come in for SANE exams, which is very sad because we know, like I said, those numbers are very, very high. So a lot of stuff is cultural. We are seeing more folks, I think more Somali folks, and I think we're seeing more folks from other places that maybe would not have come in because of cultural things. So I think gradually people are understanding that if something happens to them, they can come in and get help. I remember talking to a group of Hmong women out in Roseville at some kind of program they had. And we were talking about sexual assault. And so this elderly Hmong lady said to me, "You mean I don't have to have sex with my husband if I don't want to. And I said, no, it's your body, it's your choice, you know. And she just thought that was just like amazing that she actually had a choice whether to have sex or not. And I said, you know, I know there's a lot of stuff in your culture that I don't understand. I said, but it's your body, and you get to say who and when and where someone touches you. And I said earlier, those cases are hard to prove, but they are still a crime. And it's not about the relationship, right? It's about consent. So I think with the Me Too movement, with everything that's going on, you know, with all of the race stuff going on, I think a lot of people's eyes are being opened, kind of stuff that's going on. And it's a lot of negative stuff, but I think in the end, we may see some changes that are positive, and that is the hope that I always hold on to. 2020 was a tough year all the way around, and looking forward to 2021 being better. So hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully we'll remain optimistic.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah, so I think we'll do two more and then we'll kind of wrap it up. So,
Okay, and you know what? I apologize because I did not get through all my slides.
oh,
I had like probably, I don't know, 10 or 15 more that probably would have answered a lot of these questions. So as long as everybody can have a copy of my PowerPoint, because I have all my, you know, a lot of referrals on there also that are helpful, that I want people to know about. And there's some other stuff in there about the brain and trauma too. So, and then if you could send in my email address too, for instance, so if they have any questions or anything about the PowerPoint, please let me know. I apologize. I talk a lot and I should have moved faster and then my computer shut down. I'm blame that on the county because it is a county computer. But I had more to get to, so I apologize. But if you guys can get my PowerPoint and then, you know, email me with questions, I could send you out brochures or anything like that for sure.
absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that, Khalees. I'll make sure that they have a copy of your PowerPoint as well as your email to reach out.
Okay.
Okay, so there is a question about how would you help convince immigrants that so there's a lot of questions about sometimes immigration, so calling ICE or other things of being deported, that's being used as a threat against sexual assault survivors. And they're being told, if you report, I'll call immigration. So what can you do to convince them that they would not be contacted? Or how do you kind of navigate that situation if being reported to immigration is being used as a threat?
Yeah. That has not got anything to do with sexual assault. So if they report that and they're here illegally or, you know, whatever, law enforcement doesn't care about that. They're focused on the sexual assault. If you have a warrant, law enforcement doesn't care about that. They're focused on the sexual assault. They don't want to deter folks from coming forward because of their immigration status or because they have a warrant. So that, of course, if the warrant is for murder, then, you know, they're not going to overlook that. But those minor infringements, they're not thinking about that. And they don't care about ICE and all that because they know how individuals work. And we've had, except a couple victims, I think, that were threatened by ICE and still, or threatened with, you know, the immigration stuff and still filed a police report and nothing happens. So law enforcement is not concerned about that. They're focused on the sexual assault. So they won't have to worry about that. And I know folks get threatened with that, but tell them, even if they do call, it has nothing to do with the sexual assault. No.
Thank you, Khalees. All right, so there's another question about similarly involving law enforcement. How do you what's a good way to describe that process to a survivor who wants to file a police report? What can you tell them about?
Yeah, well, so if somebody wanted to file a police report, and let's just say it's for a non-acute case, which means it's not happening right now. So they would call it a non-emergency number. I'm just going to use St. Paul because the majority of them come through them. So they call the non-emergency St. Paul number. St. Paul would send out a patrol officer or street officer. That street officer is supposedly trained to just get basic information from the survivors. So their name, if they know the name of the person that hurt them, if they know where the sexual assault occurred and when it occurred, just that basic information, no details. The patrol officer then goes back to his office, types up that report, and I think he has 24 to 48 hours to get it to an investigator. The sex crimes investigator, there's maybe 7 or 8 of them in St. Paul. They're the ones that do all the work on the case. So the investigator gets the case. I think he has a couple days to contact the victim. So the investigator gets the case, a couple days, he'll contact the victim. He'll say, hi, this is Mike from St. Paul Sex Crimes. I'm your investigator on the case. Is this a good number that I can reach you at? If he doesn't know if this person is connected with SOS, he's going to say, are you working with SOS? If they say no, he's going to say, I'm going to give your name and have an advocate call you because they want the survivor working with an advocate right away before they're involved. Usually we're already involved, but sometimes we're not on these cases. And then the investigator will say, let's set up a time to do an interview. They're doing them in person now. For a while it was over Zoom or on the phone, FaceTime. And so they'll set up a time for the interview, and then the officer will call SOS and say, hey, I need an advocate for this sexual assault interview Friday at 3. I'll be like, yep, somebody will be there. And then we'll show up, we'll go through the interview. We'll all 3 be in the room together. My job there is to support the survivor. So St. Paul does a good job at putting the survivor at ease, explaining, I'm gonna have to ask you some hard questions. I'm gonna need details, but this is why I have to ask you. And once they know why and explain it in a nice, calm voice, survivors are fine. So my job is to make sure that they're understanding everything, and you can tell the way somebody looks. If they need a break, I'm gonna say, hey, we need 5 minutes. The investigators are good at saying, you know what, I think I'm gonna give you 5 minutes with your advocate so you can regroup. They're very good at reading the survivor as well. But if not, it's my job or the advocate's job to say, you know what, this is a lot. We need a timeout. And sometimes the interviews get to be over an hour, and it does get a lot. So after that interview is done, the investigator will explain to the survivor the next steps, right? So I have to interview all these people you told me. I have all their information. After I do that, I will interview the perpetrator. Sometimes the perpetrator is not around and they have to locate them. It takes a while, but the investigator will lay out next steps. And he or she will also say, if you want any updates, if I'm not calling you a lot, call police or call the advocate because they'll know. So when the survivor leaves that room, he or she will know exactly the next steps and what's going to happen. And the advocate will have heard everything first from the police. So they will also know the next steps. So that's how the process works as far as getting the investigation together. I would call law enforcement probably, depending on the case, I'd probably call them every 3 weeks. Hey, I'm getting ready to call my client. Do you have an update on the case? Oh yeah, I just talked to him and he's in custody, or I'm almost done. We try to call the police before we call the survivor so we can give them the criminal case update if they have an open case instead of calling them back another time. And then we just keep them informed through the whole criminal justice process. Law enforcement part ends when all the investigation is complete, all the interviews are done, all the evidence is back from the BCA. They wrap that up in a nice little package and they send that down to the Ramsey County Prosecutor's office. There is 4 charging attorneys that look at these cases and say, yep, we're going to charge this, we're moving forward, or we're going to have to decline, there's not enough evidence. We have 1 prosecutor that's working on these cases, Karen Kugler. She's fabulous. She has been charging a lot of sexual assault cases that were not getting charged in the past. So Ramsey County is doing a much better job, and we are so pleased about that because more survivors are getting justice through the system. And so Yep, so we go to, so their case goes down to the Ramsey County prosecutors, charging attorneys decide if it's going to move forward. If it moves forward and gets charged, case is assigned to a prosecutor and a victim witness advocate. That victim witness advocate will contact the survivor and say, hey, I want you to come in. You know, the prosecutor has questions for you. You can bring your advocate if you want. I'll probably already know that they want her down there. And those kind of things. So usually the advocate is there with them, even if the victim witness advocate is there, because like I said, their job is for the criminal justice system, where our job is always, you know, it's after this and all through this whole process. So, and then if their case goes to court, we're in the courtroom, it's very hard. I really like sometimes when perpetrators take plea deals, because then survivors don't have to get up on the stand and tell their story. And it is very, very hard for victims. Sometimes there are people in the courtroom that are making noises and faces and, you know, trying to say stuff under their breath while the victim is testifying. It can be just really, really horrible for the survivors. So it's great if the perp takes a plea deal and we get some time in jail and some probation time. Is really good. And I think a lot of times, even if their case doesn't go to court, survivors just want to know that they did something, right? I didn't let this person get away with it. I followed this through, and sometimes that's enough for folks. Even if the person walks free, they know that they tried and they did everything they could. And for other folks, it's hard. It's hard when that person walks out of the courtroom after you've laid out your heart on the stand and you've went through this experience for over a year, and it's like that there they go, right? So then you have to talk about what justice looks like outside of the criminal justice system. How are you going to heal, right? How are you going to get to that next step? Because you can't let this take you down. So what can we do to get you to that point where you're feeling safe and you're on a healing path? And that's hard for folks. So that's why I'm glad that we're there for as long as we can be.
Absolutely. Thank you, Khalees.
Thank
There
you.
are a few more questions, but I think we're ready to wrap it up, and I'll send your email directly to some of those folks, and everyone will have your email as well too. But for the Q&A purposes, I'll send your email to you and say, please send this question directly to Khalees. She'll be happy
Perfect.
to answer it. But I just wanted to thank you again so much for sharing all of this incredible and really, really important information with us all today. And I know there'll be many watching the recording as well too, but I just wanted to extend so much gratitude to you and also our ASL interpreters from ThinkSelf too.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
You as well.